Welcome to NinjaCast, a photography podcast powered by Studio Ninja, the world's highest rated business management app, built specifically for photographers. Listen and learn as the most successful photographers on the planet share their knowledge to help you transform every element of your photography business. Here's your host, Sally Shaw.
Hi guys, welcome to NinjaCast. Today I'm joined by the lovely Lacey Barratt. So today we're going to be covering all sorts to do with birth photography, from what you need to know before venturing into birth photography to how to make a business plan and make sure that everything's covered, and also, the pros and the cons of being a birth photographer and everything you'll need to know. Let's get started. Hi Lacey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Really well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to come and chat with us today.
That is okay. I'm super excited to have a discussion and see where it takes us.
Absolutely. We're about to pick your brains.
I love it. I'm here for it.
Lacey, for our listeners that may not have heard of you, can you tell them a little bit about you, your history, your journey in the industry so far?
Yeah, so I am a birth photographer and a doula, slash life coach. Mm-hmm. I kind of think that they're essentially the same thing, because everything that we learn in birth can be applied to every other aspect of our life, including business and making money. Mm-hmm. So I tend to coach other women and non-binary folks who have children. Mm-hmm. And it's so much fun to have those kinds of discussions about, like, okay, what have you learned from having a baby and how can we apply that to mm-hmm. the rest of your life to create what it is that you want to create in life.
Amazing. So take us back a little bit. So have you always been a birth photographer? What kind of brought you to being a birth photographer?
This is such a funny story. So I started photographing births. So I'm American. I'm from New Orleans, back in Louisiana. Every now and then you might hear my Southern drawl come out. But,
love that.
But I moved over to Australia in 2011, and I started photographing in 2012 after my first baby was born. And I literally jumped on eBay and I took my last $90 of my maternity leave pay. Mm-hmm. And I bought a D90X, a Nikon D90X. Mm-hmm. And that was it. From that point on, it was like, I'm a photographer, guys.
Just like that.
But I mean, when you're looking at the mindset of becoming the thing that you want to be, even though I was pretty crap, but in my head, it was like that I'm a photographer now. Yeah. And looking back in hindsight and seeing where that mentality has gotten me 12 years later, it's like, oh, I'm so glad I was kind of up myself and thought that I knew what I was doing, because it really took me really far. And so those are the kinds of like mindset shifts that I like to try and help other photographers be able to create for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of those, if you don't believe in yourself, why are people going to believe in you, isn't it?
It's so true. It's so true. And so after, when you first get a camera, you're like, I shoot everything. I shoot events, weddings, birthdays, newborn, maternity, all of the things. And I did that for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then I had my second baby. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, it was like, one of my friends, when I was pregnant, asked me to photograph her birth. And because I shot everything, I was like, heck yeah. Mm-hmm. And after I shot her birth, it was like, that's it. Like this is all I want to do. And yeah, that was 12 years ago.
I mean, over here in the UK, especially, birth photography is not unheard of, but it's just becoming a thing. It's just becoming known. It's certainly not as popular as it is over in the US or anything like that. So there'll be a lot of listeners, I think, listen to this going, birth photography, why? Like, why would you?
Yeah.
So what's your answer to that? What made you, in that moment with your first photographing your first birth, what made you go, yeah, this is for me, like this is what I want to do?
So after my first son was born, actually when I was pregnant, my mom is in the States, and I love my mom. She is amazing, best friend, incredible human being. But she asked me if I was going to photograph it. And I was like, that's just mom being nosy, like trying to like have her nose in my business.
Yeah.
When she doesn't really need to. Like, if you want to come, just fly on over and come. And it's funny because my husband actually said, no one needs to see her like that, which is very interesting now, because our perspective has changed so much. Like, as a first-time mom at 22 years old, my thought process about birth was that it was painful, a traumatic experience that you had to endure, and all of these things. And so over time, that really evolved into like this really powerful, primal, humanistic experience that vagina owners go through, right? And so having that experience, and then looking back Facebook 12 months later, time hop is like, on this day 12 months ago, 3 images popped up from his birth, from like his day of birth.
Yeah.
And I was so sad, because that was all that I had to remember that day by. And I was like, gosh, what happened? What did I look like when I was in labor? Were you giving me a cuddle? Were you like touching me? Was I screaming and yelling at you? Was I making faces? What did my face look like whenever he was born? And I didn't have any of that to remember. And so what I found is, the more I began documenting births, I had a lot of clients that would tell me, oh, if things start to go a little haywire, like, stop documenting. Like, I don't want to see the pictures. And what I learned is that birth photography helps extend the high of a good birth. And it helps heal a bad birth. And it's so important to remember that as much as we have our bodily autonomy in the birth process, we also have our emotional autonomy in that process as well. And so what's been so amazing to watch, how birth photography has changed the face of how people are birthing, is that so many people are taking autonomy over their emotions by viewing photographs of how they birthed. And then they get to decide, well, how do I want to feel about what I'm looking at? So empowering.
Yeah, definitely. It must be such, so I'm a wedding photographer, and what I'm like, the most emotional person going, speeches, I'll be like going behind the camera, like crying away when there's like a really emotional speech. I dread to think how emotional it must be to be in a birth, as a birth photographer, seeing, a couple, or, a single person, or someone surrounded by their family going through all of that. And you're just there sitting through it all, like you're part of that.
It's quite phenomenal to witness, life coming into the world, and life exiting the world as well, because that is also part of birth as well. And it's always such an incredible honor to be invited into somebody's birth space, and how transformational it is for not only the families, but for me as well as a documenter. My goodness, every single birth, I learned something new about birth. I learned something new about myself, about my boundaries, about my triggers, about stuff that I need to deal with, about trauma that I didn't even remember existed. And, I use that as almost like a barometer of where am I in my own life and in my own business, and how am I feeling within myself. So incredible.
So you mentioned there, I feel like we've got to touch on this a little bit. You mentioned that not only have you seen birth come into the world, but you've seen life come into the world. You've seen life leaving the world as well. That must have been, I don't even know what the word is. That must have been a hell, to be able to have to kind of stand there and document something when it's such a sad time. It's physically happening in front of your eyes. So how did you, as I think it's important to kind of touch on that, because people will go into birth photography thinking, I'm seeing these happy moments and this baby coming into the world. And, although, yes, the person might be in a little pain, but they're going to be amazing afterwards. They're going to be so happy. That's not always the end story, is it?
No, it isn't. And, I also want to say that even in instances where babies are born thriving, sometimes it's still not a happy ending. You've got postpartum depression, you've got antenatal depression, and, you've got all of these different things, all these changes in hormones that's going on in not just your emotional body, but your physical body as well. And that can come as a shock to the most prepared of people. Yeah. And then, you add on top of that, a baby dying, and it changes the whole narrative, like the whole landscape of what birth looks like. And I think that when we're documenting births, we have to understand that birth is life and life is death. Like, it's part of the circle of life. Yeah. And I think it's extremely naive for I run an educational platform, and one of the things that we talk a lot about in exposing birth photography is trauma and loss, and what it means to be an emotional first responder. Because you've got to remember, by the time a woman has a baby, gets pregnant, births the baby, leaves the hospital, goes home, day 3 baby blues, realizes in 4 weeks that it's postpartum depression, goes and sees a GP, and then the GP gives them a referral, and then they're on a wait list. And by the time they get to a psychologist, it's months down the track. And so as a birth photographer and as a doula, I have understood that I am an emotional first responder in that situation. Like, a paramedic would come and stabilize, I'm not medically trained. I'm not stabilizing patients, but as an example, we are kind of giving the stents in order to get them the support that they need in the long run. And so part of that is processing with looking at images from your birth. And it's really difficult. It's so difficult to watch and to see grief forming around a family right before your eyes. But at the same time, it is still one of the most incredible things to witness, just as is birth, like a thriving baby. And so I find both experiences just as equally important as the other. And I think it's really important to also talk about death in the birth space just as much as we talk about life in the birth space as well.
Definitely. I think it would be so easy, for me then, even part of my brain went, oh, should you go back to that? Should we talk about that? And actually, no, that's the thing you've got to push through and you've got to talk about, because that is a matter of life, isn't it? And if somebody's thinking about becoming a birth photographer, they have to also think about what they could be capturing on the flip side as well.
Absolutely. And how to document that. People ask me all the time, because I document losses quite frequently, and they'll be like, well, how do you document it? What do you do? And I'm like, the same exact way you would document a thriving birth is the same way I document loss, because it's still birth, right? It's still the same process for the mother and the family. There's some differences, obviously, but as far as, they're just going to care for their baby differently than what they would a thriving baby. And so I actually don't treat them any differently at all.
I'm sure they can feel that as well, as, for your clients, they'll see your work, they'll see how you photograph a birth, a thriving baby, and they'll see actually when they're in that experience, if they have got a loss, that actually things have been exactly the same with you as they would have been had their baby been healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it takes a very special person to be I don't think I could do birth photography. I would love to. I love the idea of, but I think you've got to be such a strong person to even take away all the other elements to photograph a healthy, thriving birth where the baby's all good at the end of it and mum's happy and mum's in a good place. Then even that still, I think, takes such a strong-willed person.
Yeah, there's so much to process. And, there's things that I do very frequently, grounding techniques that I have that I've implemented for myself when I'm in a situation and I don't feel safe, not because I don't feel physically safe, like someone's going to harm me, but emotionally unsafe, bringing up past traumas or something. I'll like to pinch myself and be like, I'm here in the present. I'm not wherever I was when the trauma occurred. Because that's typically what happens when you're triggered, is you're transported back to that point in time of where the trauma happened. And so, constantly pinching myself and I am safe and saying things out loud. And it's definitely a lot to take on, especially the on-call life.
Yeah, that was what I was going to touch on next, actually. So, weddings, for example, it was what I know, you have a set day, you've got to be there at a set time, the ceremony's at a set time. With being a birth photographer, all that goes out the window. You literally could be called out at 2 a.m, 4 a.m, 2 p.m.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's probably the hardest part about the whole thing of being a birth photographer, is being on call. Mm-hmm. And so I have 5 kids.
Wow.
Yeah, I have 5 kids. And when I went into birth photography, and this can kind of segue us into business if you want to talk about that. But when I went into birth photography, I was unable to do it as a part-time job or a side hustle or, in my spare time kind of thing. And so hubby and I made the joint decision, if this is what I'm going to do, then it has to be our main income. Mm-hmm. And so he quit his job. Mm-hmm. And then I started making all of the money. Uh-huh. And it was just this really incredible gender role reversal, and masculine and feminine exchange. Right. And I had to price myself differently, because I was no longer using this as a supplementary income for what my partner was making. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's a lot that that can go into the logistics of becoming a birth photographer and how you want to create your business to work for you.
Absolutely. So you touched on kind of the masculine, feminine energies there already, but let's just kind of delve into that a little bit more for you. I mean, that must have been a hell of a shift for you, but also for your husband as well. That's not necessarily something that you don't see in very often, but you don't hear of very often, perhaps. It's just something that happens, within marriages or relationships, where they just go, yeah, I'm going to go out, I'm going to earn the money, and the other person's going to stay at home. So how does it feel for you to have that shift having happened in your life and your business?
I actually did an interview with Matt about this and chucked it up on my podcast, and it's so funny. It's not the greatest quality, but it's so funny. I found it to be, it wasn't a big deal. At first it was yeah, whatever. Yeah. And I still think, we're 5 years in and he's still a stay-at-home dad. And I still don't think that it's very normal to us. But what I did find difficult was the energetical exchange between me and my business, as being, I'm typically more, I like to flow. And so I don't think of masculine and feminine as a gender, but as an energy. And so I feel like masculinity is very staccato, where it's checklist and diaries and entries and do the admin and send your emails and schedule this. And then the feminine is what do I feel like doing today? And so I was and still am very much so a feminine, energetical disaster. And so I found it really difficult to be as someone who works from home, I have to get up at a certain time now, and I have to make sure that I'm doing this at this time and this at this time. And then even with, if I would go out to a birth and then I would come home and I just so happened to be home in time for dinner, if it was an overnight birth and I was home for dinner, I didn't want to do the dishes. And like, 6 months in, Matt was like, babe, you never do the dishes anymore. And I was like, I don't do the dishes. And then I was like, babe, you never, what was it? You never make me a sandwich anymore. Like the kind of, I mean, I was asking him to make me a sandwich and he was like, but you never do the dishes. And so there was this literal, feminine and masculine energy role reversal. And I was like, I just want you to give me a cuddle. And he's like, I just want you to do the dishes. Which is the complete opposite. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I know what men feel like when they come home from work.
Yeah.
It's not like it's an energetical thing. I don't necessarily think that it's a gender thing. And yeah, that was so interesting. And so we were able to sit down and have like a really powerful conversation between the two of us with what do you want? What do you want? And then how can we meet those needs or negotiate, because I don't want to do the dishes anymore.
We'll negotiate, but I'm not doing the dishes.
Yeah. Happy to meet you halfway. I'll get the kids to do them, but I'm not.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So, I mean, I'm sure people are listening to this thinking, birth photography could be for me. That sounds like a space that I could step into. What would be your advice? What kind of plan do they need in place? What important factors do they need to consider before actually taking that leap?
Yeah. So I think birth photography can work for anybody. I believe that there is an invisible standard in every niche that, this is how it's done. And so the invisible standard for birth photography is have a backup. And I believe in this. Like, I believe you need a backup. You need to have all of these things. But I also want to leave room for the feminine to flow and for people to be able to make decisions about what works best for their family. I had a coaching client who was like, I really want to do birth photography, but my son has soccer on Mondays and I can't attend births on Mondays. So what do I do? And I was like, don't go to births on Mondays. And she was like, but I have to. And I was like, no, you don't. You can call a backup to come and back up for you on Mondays. So there is still that freedom of creating your business how you want, but you have to have a backup. You have to have a CRM. You have to, otherwise it's a nightmare.
I can imagine that it is a scary place trying to juggle everything and keep where every birth is up to, where every pregnancy is up to. Trying to juggle that would just be mind-blowing.
Well, it's really tricky because there's no session date. Which I love that tick box. That's my favorite tick box in Studio Ninja. No session date.
Sometime in the future.
No, it's there. It's there already. I love that button. I take it all the time.
I mean, like the date, like it'll be.
Yes. I don't know when it is. And so, some of the things that I value the most is my CRM software. I have 2 cameras. So if one malfunctions, I've got another one. And what did I say the first time? A backup.
Backup, yeah.
And if you have children, then you'll need reliable childcare. And so those are just some of the main things that you'll need. But then again, I have had newborn children and told my clients that if they wanted to book me, that I would have my newborn with me or my children with me. And they were like, that's fine. So,
just setting that
there's this invisible standard of how it's run, but also remember you can create it however you want. And there's always someone that will book you.
Love that. So what's your advice when it comes to mindset, manifestation? You've got to be, and I think, in a very strong headspace to be able to do that. This is as a job, I've already said that, but equally within that, strength, you also have to be mentally strong and, in a good space and able to, also recognize when you're not in a good space and have strategies to be able to cope with that, especially if you're right there photographing a birth. So what's your advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of takes me back to at the beginning when I was like, I got my first camera and it was a totally shit camera, but I was like, I'm a photographer now.
Yeah.
You know, I bought like 100 plants for the house during lockdown because I was going crazy. And I was like, I'm basically a botanist now, you know? And so as far as like manifesting goes, it is putting yourself in a position of where you're already doing the thing that you want to do, even though you're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was buying a camera and being the photographer, even though I wasn't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But because I did it, it put me in alignment with what it was that I wanted to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is all about, I only like to do things that make me feel good. And, you know, some people will argue and say, well, you still have to do the admin, even though you don't like it. And I'm like, but do I really?
That's what Studio Ninja's for.
Right. I'm like, right. And so, which automations are amazing. Amazing. I send those automations to trigger off at 37 weeks. It's so good.
Love it.
And yeah, so aligning myself with the things it is that I want to do. So I tend to take a step back and think about like, okay, what am I trying to achieve? What do I want? Is it I'm just making things up, but is it $1 million business? Is it 6 births a month? Is it a franchise? Do I want to franchise out my business and have, you know, whatever? And are the things that I'm doing now, does it make me feel like what that dream makes me feel like?
Mm-hmm.
And if it does, then I'll do it. And if it doesn't, then I won't, because it's not in alignment with what it is that I want. So I'm very much so a feelings based kind of gal. I some might call that emotional, but I call that wise.
I love that. No, it's I mean, you get one life at the end of the day, right? You know, if you're not going to do things that make you happy, then you're going to spend your life miserable, and that's not what it's all about. So definitely. So I feel like we need to move on to kind of business technicalities a little bit now. We've spoken a lot about you know, how it feels to be a birth photographer, having a little bit of a plan in place beforehand. So if somebody's deciding that, you know, this is for them, they definitely want to do it, they've got a bit of a plan in place, but actually they've got no clue what to charge. They've never done this before. You know, they're really, they want to make it a full-time thing, which, as you've already explained, it's kind of got to be. Yeah. I mean, charging your worth is massive in the industry in general, but also in birth photography too, right? So how can our listeners kind of change their perspective on pricing and make sure that they're pricing where they're supposed to be?
Yeah, I feel like charge your worth is a super controversial. Well, it's controversial for me. Whenever I hear charge your worth, I'm like, do I?
Yeah.
It feels really gross for me, because charge your worth is indicating that if you charge less than someone else, that you're not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like the way that makes me feel. And if that makes me feel that way, then surely someone else is going to feel less worthy as well. And then it becomes a battle of pricing, right? Like, and so this is like we get so pissed off at people undercutting us, but we created that problem. We literally created that problem by telling people that they need to charge their worth. And then they're going, well, if you think you're worth that much, I'm worth that much too, but I'm just gonna charge $50 less or $200 less. And so now the only thing that instead of looking at somebody, especially in the birth space, and I'm sure it's the same in the wedding industry, you really need to be able to connect to that person. And excuse me.
Okay.
And when you're unable to, when it's all about money, that's the only thing that they're comparing you to the next photographer. There is nothing different between photographer A, B, and C except price. And so now they're going to be making a decision on hiring somebody based on price. Mm-hmm. And so I try to make it extremely obvious that it's not the price or the money that is what's important to me. It's about the relationship that we can build in the process, and what you can benefit from it as a client, and what I can benefit from it as a human being, as a photographer as well. And so, this is how we get a bunch of people who are like, I had this problem client. And I'm like, really? How'd that go? Or I hear a lot of people who are like, well, I am charging, I don't know, a considerably less amount of money than what someone else is. And they're like, I still can't get bookings. And there's this like fine line between too expensive and then too cheap. And then people are like, well, where do I sit? And my answer to this is always, how much do you need to live the lifestyle that you want to live?
Yeah.
Because this is the whole reason that we went into business, is to have the freedom to be able to do what we wanted when we wanted. And this is, especially if you're a woman in business, this is, I think, where the feminine and the masculinity kind of like headbutt, because you're a woman who has gone into business, which stems from a very feminine energy, because you're like, I'm feeling good. And I'm like, maybe I can do something with this. Maybe I can monetize it. And then you like hit that brick wall of masculinity and business. And then you're like, why am I not making any money? This isn't working. And so bring it back to the basics of, why did you start your business? Well, because you wanted to be financially independent, because you wanted to contribute to the family income. So I always ask people, what's your ultimate goal? Is your goal to retire your partner? Is your goal to pay for holidays only? Is your goal for extracurricular activities? And then base your pricing off of that. Me being the sole income provider for 5 children, my pricing is going to be way different than somebody who is whose partner works full time, and their mom or their mother-in-law can take their children whenever they can, and so that's going to make a massive difference in pricing. But that doesn't mean that person who is charging half the price that I am is any worse than me. Like, your value is not based on how much money you're charging. And that's why I get so triggered when I hear charge your worth. But I'm like, but what if they don't need to charge as much money as you? And then what we end up doing is we end up outpricing ourselves in our own industry, because then we're like, you're charging $2,000, I'm going to charge $2,200. And everyone needs to increase the prices. And then everyone collectively increases the prices. And then they've like priced themselves out of everybody. So what do you do when you're in an industry or in a niche where you're like, everybody deserves to have access to incredible wedding photographers. Everyone deserves to have access to incredible birth photographers. And then you've got this internal dialogue between photographers that are constantly bitching at each other to raise the bar. You price yourself out of your own industry. And then people are like, I don't have any inquiries because everyone's charging $5,000.
I love that. I love that approach to pricing, because I think it's, it's so often heard, isn't it, in the photography industry in general, but I'm sure in many other industries, that there's these price increases, there's price increments each year, there's, and by all means, I'm sure that still happens in birth photography as well as any other industry. But I think it's where it's necessary and where it's needed, and, where, you're not covering costs and things like that, then absolutely that's the right time to be upping your prices. But I think sometimes people just up them for the fun of it.
And look, I mean, I've done that before. I've upped my prices for the fun of it, just to see if someone would book me. Like, I took my
people use it as a tactic too, right? Like, so they'll say, I don't need any more bookings this year. Like, I'm golden, I don't need any more. So I'll put my prices up. And if, if people book me, then I'm getting more money out of it. It's more worth my while adding that extra one onto, my workload. But if they don't, then maybe the price puts them off and my diary stays as it is anyway. And I'm, I've got a regular workload that isn't overworking me.
Yeah. But then what happens in 12 months when you put your pricing back down? And everyone thinks that you're the most expensive person around
Already
and no one booked you. Yeah. It's such a complex topic where there's validities on both sides. Like, I do think that charging your worth is really important because it's empowering to oneself. But then again, I also think that it causes a lot of internal conflict between the community of photographers, of battling it out over we all need to make more money. But it's not my colleagues' responsibility to make sure that I'm making enough money. You know, like, because someone else is charging less than me, and that doesn't, it's not their fault that I'm not getting enough bookings. And so then I have to take a step back and go, okay, so what is going on? I think that how my business is doing is directly related to how I'm doing as an individual. So if my business is in the shit, then I'm like, okay, I'm not getting any bookings. People are saying mean things about me on the internet, which isn't uncommon because I say some pretty controversial things. But you know, like, if when I'm not booking anybody, I have to go, okay, so what energy am I showing up in? And is it attracting people or is it repelling people?
Yeah.
And 90% of the time, 99.9% of the time, there is a thought that has come into my head that has led to a belief that has led to me acting out on that belief, which is now changing the reality around me and how I show up in the world and how I create my world around me. So yeah, I think that there's a direct correlation between my business and myself personally that I like to kind of watch.
Keep an eye on, absolutely. So I mean, you're a really inspiring person, Lacey. This is the first time that we've connected, and I'm like totally all here for you. You're amazing. There must be people in your life or people that you look up to or that inspire you. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about one or two of these people?
Yeah, I think when it comes to inspiration, I think anybody can be an inspiration. I'm either inspired to be like that person or I'm inspired to not be like that person. And so I think it's all about just a matter of perspective, right? And what it is that we're looking to achieve in our life and who it is that we want to model as well. Some people that really inspire me, like individuals, are I'm obsessed with Lady Gaga, right?
Love Lady Gaga.
Absolutely obsessed. I think anyone who is a powerful woman with money, which sounds really strange to say, but I'm really inspired by powerful women with money. And I think because when I see that, I go, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. And then to see what they do with that money and the energy exchange that they have between other women in their industry and other charities that they are, contributing to. I think that we need more money in the hands of powerful women because of the energy exchange that creates. That's all money is, right? It's just energy. And so we can create powerful bonds with each other by me exchanging money with you and you exchanging money with someone else. And that connects all of us women together through that energetical exchange. So I find that to be extremely powerful and inspiring. And those are the kind of people that I really look up to.
Love that. Fantastic. If you could add a final piece of advice, Lacey, it's something that we ask on all of our shows to kind of close off the episode a little bit. The golden nugget takeaway for our listeners, what would that be for you?
Oh, I think it would be to only do what feels good. I think that's the best bit of advice that I can give is if it feels good, do it. And if it scares you and excites you at the same time, do it. That's where the comfort zone, that's where you get pushed out of your comfort.
Yeah, hell of a bombshell to end on, most definitely. If our listeners would like to get in contact with you, Lacey, would like to hear more about what you do, talk to you about birth photography, talk to you about your education side of things, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can visit www.exposingbirth.com. And that's where you'll find all of the birth photography education. And then if you are more interested in coaching or doula education or working with me as a doula, you can visit laceybarratt.com.au.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today. I
Thank
really
you, Sally.
appreciate it. It's been the best episode. I've learned a ton. So I definitely know that our listeners will have done. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll be able to catch up soon.
I would love that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lacey. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, guys, that's everything from me today. Thank you so much again to Lacey for coming on the show and sharing all of her knowledge and expertise when it comes to birth photography. If you'd like to learn more, you can head to www.studioninja.co/episode 52. Please don't forget to rate us on the podcast platform that you're listening on. A little bit of love goes a very long way. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of NinjaCast, brought to you by Studio Ninja. Beautifully designed and super easy to use, Studio Ninja will help you manage your leads, clients, shoots, invoices, contracts, workflows, and so much more. To learn more or start your 30-day free trial, go to www.studioninja.co.